All right, welcome back. These days, most everybody's got one of these or something like it. Pretty cool. You can play your music, make your calls, check the weather, do whatever you want. But a few tidbits you might not know about this bugger, particularly for the guy who made it. He's likely been working for as much as 35 hours continuously, doing the same repetitive motion at lightning speed while being yelled at if he stops, talks, or goes to the bathroom. Typically makes 31 cents an hour. Lives in a factory dorm that sleeps 8 to 10 people to a room. And if he tries to form a union and change that, he'll be sentenced to a 12-year prison sentence, all of which could explain why that employee and $600,000 a year jump off the building right after they finish making our iPhones. Really? That's why this controversial factory named Foxconn, located in China, installed the yellow nets you see there to prevent jumpers from dying. Creates a new perspective when it comes to checking the weather, right? Foxconn, responsible for making everything from your Dell computer to your Sony PlayStation to, yes, your iPhone, has come under intense scrutiny in the wake of a dozen worker suicides earlier this year. Now, Bloomberg Business Magazine out with an exclusive look inside the Chinese factory and a one-on-one interview with the billionaire who runs the place. And joining us now is the executive editor of Bloomberg Business Week, Hugo Lindgren. Also with us, columnist Johann Hari, who has written extensively on Foxconn. And Johann, a lot of the facts that I just reported came from your reporting. You're the most recent to be there on behalf of Bloomberg. Hugo, do your facts match up with Johann's?
Well, I think there have been significant improvements since that was 2006. Is that correct? Where that report was after the original report in the Daily Mail in London?
Yes.
You know, after pressure from a lot of the companies which does business with Apple and with Hewlett-Packard, Foxconn instituted, you know, a series of reforms to improve workplace conditions.
So let's go through that list.
Sure.
31 cents an hour. Doesn't sound like a lot of money.
Well, wages have gone up. Wages were actually increased right after this spring, after the suicides, and there's a second raise that's going in effect in October.
To what?
As well. Well, I think
I've been myself have received raises on small salaries, and they're like, oh, here's a 24% raise, and you're like, that's 12 cents.
You know, I think it's true, of course, that wages in China are a lot lower than what we're accustomed to seeing in the West.
Enough.
So it's difficult to use that comparison directly.
What about, but what's not difficult is 10 people to a room in 18-hour days.
They've improved some of the dorm conditions. You know, one of the things in that original report, the triple-decker bunk beds, things like that, really crammed in. You know, our reporter was able to roam the campus in Shenzhen pretty freely without supervision, looked at the dorms. You know, they were not places that I would feel comfortable living in, probably not you either.
Why not?
Because they were very cramped and they had a lot of people in them. But they were not, you know, they were somewhat analogous to sort of campus dorm rooms that, you know, young people in this country are in.
Johann, when you hear Hugo's reporting a few years later, do you feel encouraged by the potential improvement since you were there, or discouraged by the fact that this is called improvement?
Well, I should be clear, Dylan, I haven't reported from these factories, because what happens is if people like me turn up, they get shown a Potemkin factory. They get shown a fake dormitory, a very nice dormitory. It's how Steve Jobs could say, well, I don't understand how people can possibly kill themselves in this place. It's a great place to be. So what happens is you get shown a fake thing. So what we have to do is look at the testimony of Chinese people who are sent there undercover by groups like the National Labour Committee, who then find out the real goods. And one of the things that's very striking, if you read the National Labour Committee reports, is the people who work there regard it as like a prison. One of the first things one of their investigators was told, a teenager came up to him and said, "We are like prisoners here, we're like livestock, we're not treated like workers." What is basically happening in these factories is that we, you and me, are shopping until they drop. I think a really good way for people to understand this is to look at one guy who didn't kill himself, a guy who died in May, called Yan Li, who is absolutely typical of the workers there. He was 27 years old, he worked there for a long time, never had any problems. His job was to just turn a little notch that went into the iPad that I own, that many of your viewers own, and he worked 35-hour shifts. And one day after a 35-hour shift, he dropped dead. And he's not that unusual. China Daily, a major Chinese news source, says 600,000 people are worked to death every year in China. They've actually got a word for it, gualaosi. It's a word that was actually originally coined in the gulags, but has now become part of the common discourse about the way that the goods that you and I use are manufactured.
That was you're saying a lot right there. Do you get the sense that you were, A, shown a fake, in terms of a facility? I mean, impossible for you. Obviously, weren't there. Josh Tarangle was there, but is it
Frederick
no?
Balfour and Tim Copeland were there.
Sorry, but who do you have? Would you even know?
You know, of course we don't know. They have almost 1 million workers all over China. We went to one significant campus they have in Shenzhen where they have 300,000 people. We were able to go around unsupervised. We spoke to 25 people who work there in a bunch of different settings, both on the job, in their dormitories, in some of the sort of recreational facilities they have there. Look, the work is monotonous, it's tough, the hours are long, all those things are true. You know, I don't think there are many people being worked to death at Foxconn these days, but I have no sure way of knowing. Yeah. I think that when, you know, one of the things that we realized in doing this reporting was, you know, labor practices in China are tough. They definitely are. And the smaller the company and the further away from major cities, the more likely there are to be abuses. Foxconn is kind of in the sights of the Western media, of the companies with which it does business, who, you know, do not like this bad kind of public relations, do not like their products.
They don't want the iPhone they don't want me holding this up being like, check the weather and hope the guy that made it doesn't jump.
No, that's true, and so there's, you know, there's a lot of pressure on them to behave better. I mean,
right. Although it's profitable, cheap labor is good for the stock price, right?
Dylan,
go ahead, Johann.
I'm sorry, Dylan, there's a really important point here that American viewers in particular need to understand. There is a huge movement in China of Chinese workers saying, we ain't going to be treated like this anymore. There have been 126,000 strikes in China this year. People holding banners saying there are no human rights here, we won't take this anymore. And it's really important that you know, American corporations, particularly the Chamber of Commerce, have been leading a massive lobbying campaign within China and on the American government as well to pressure China, saying don't let them form independent trade unions. The Chinese government has begun to concede to these workers in Guangdong province. They are allowing people to form trade unions. And US corporations are going crazy. They are threatening to leave the country and they are lobbying extremely hard. They want to continue keeping those people chained to those desks because it keeps their profits high and their costs low. And it's very important that...
No, carry on.
Sorry. Well, it's very important that Americans know this struggle is something that you are part of, whether you like it or not. Everything in your house, everything in my house pretty much, all the electronic gadgets, all the things that make our society zing and bling are made by these people in these conditions, and they don't want to live like that. Now, you're part of that. You can either let your corporations speak for you and let them keep these people suppressed, or you can support groups like the trade unions in the United States who are saying no, we should be on the side of the people arguing for basic human freedoms, like the freedom to have a break in a 12-hour shift, like the freedom to be able to go to the toilet if you're doing a 12-hour shift, like the freedom to be able to refuse to do a 35-hour shift that will kill you.
Does it surprise you that U.S. multinationals have been lobbying for lousy labor practices in China? Does it surprise you? Doesn't surprise me.
I guess it doesn't surprise me, but I think one of the big issues, of course, is that companies always try to find lower wages. That is true of companies everywhere, in every country.
We used to have slaves in this country.
Well,
now we just take slaves in other countries.
Slaves are
we don't want no more slaves here. We'll just take the slaves over there.
I do think that
as long as they make a good iPhone.
I do think my colleague is using a lot of the more scandalous details from this report, which I'm sure are true, to paint a picture of the way the entire labor economy
but what's
works
the counter narrative?
I don't know. I'm not going to say there's a counter narrative. I just think that there is a lot of pressure, a lot of scrutiny, and frankly, he's absolutely right about the change in sort of the attitudes and the approach of the young workers there, and that's something that's borne out in our reporting. You know, they don't want to be trapped, and the truth is they're not going to be. Whether that's through labor unions or whether that's just through the competitiveness of the labor economy there already. I mean, one of the things that's interesting with Foxconn is they're moving into retail in China, and one of the reasons is because they have a lot of workers who don't want to work in factories anymore, will basically refuse to work in factories anymore, who are good employees and who, like, it's a way to sort of leverage the labor force there too. Now you can look at that as a manipulative move on their part. It may well be, but I think it shows that there is a really accelerating change there.
Probably because we're talking about it. There's a lot of you guys are over there, and they're talking about it. It was being talked about,
right?
And that means you might be getting ready to actually do something.
We'll see.
A pleasure, Hugo.
Thank you very much.
Johann, same as well. Thank you so much for the time and your reporting as well. And the magazine out now, yes? It's out today. Bloomberg Business Week. Hugo's the executive editor, and smart fellow he is. So it's a pleasure. Thanks, guys.